You're going to be texting me later. I'm so
No,
sorry.
I meant you're way more humble than I am.
Oh, God. Ew. I hate when people say that. I don't even. What do I say? Thank you? And then it's like, oh, clearly you're not that humble. Like, I don't know how to navigate that.
No, you can say thank you.
It comes from Jesus.
Thank you.
What,
I have
humility?
walked through the fire.
Exactly.
And I have the
go.
scars to prove it.
For real.
Right.
No, that's
There's
real.
my humility answer.
That's a good answer.
That is a good answer.
Is that your real humility?
Do you want to see my scars? No.
Wow.
Battle
Wow.
scars from the church.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have them, but because my relationship was with Jesus, it didn't matter what the church did to me. Because we are all failures, but Jesus is most definitely not.
Yeah.
All right, podcast.
It like well, yeah. I mean, it grows your compassion for people when you recognize, like, I don't know, if you put your faith in your pastor, and then your pastor fails you. It's like, I don't know. Anyway, moving on.
We're talking about that video that we all shared the other day.
Yeah,
Like 2 days ago.
had a friend.
What?
I had a friend message me, and she was like, she challenged me on that video, and it was very interesting.
What video was it?
Mm.
So it was a video I shared on Instagram, pretty much saying, like, people get offended and just leave the church because they were never worshiping Jesus. They were worshiping their pastor or, like, the ministry.
Mm-hmm.
They had more of a relationship with the ministry than they did with the Lord. And so when the ministry failed them, they walked.
Somebody pushed back on you on that and said it's not true?
Yeah, no, they did say it was true, but he had mentioned deconstruction, and she was like, I went through and am still walking through a time of deconstruction, and her perspective was, and I agree with her. She said the video was very, like, directly one point, which it was, and it's a very broad, like, subject that could be talked about, but she was like, I went through this deconstruction and I love the Lord, I'm still with the Lord, but there are so many things in faith that I grew up in that I've just been going through this season of questioning. And so I was going back with her. I was like, that's awesome, and I believe that everyone should go through anything you hear from a man or an institution. You should question. You should take it to the Lord. You should take it to the Word of God. Like, you should test it. Test prophecy. Test teaching. Test, it's okay to do that. But
that to me isn't offense.
Right.
Those are separate things.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was talking to her. I was like, I feel like there's a deconstruction of institution that people go through. But then what I've experienced more is there's a deconstruction of the gospel. And people like to say, I'm deconstructing, meaning I'm either going to form the gospel into something that fits my narrative that I like, that doesn't challenge my sin, that doesn't challenge me to grow, or I'm going to deconstruct it because I'm angry with God and I just want to prove that my anger is validated. And those are what the deconstruction I've come in contact with a lot. And so we were just going back and forth about that, and just, I was like, it's okay if you question. It's okay if you lay everything you grew up learning, like purity culture, this theology, that theology, like, lay it before the Lord and be like, God, what needs to be healed? What was right? What was wrong? Like, Jesus is about relationship and conversation, not dictatorship. So bring that stuff to him. But don't use deconstruction as an excuse to validate your pride or your anger.
That's a word.
That's very true.
So.
But what was the video? What was the issue with the video specifically? Because I'm not following that.
Well, for her perspective, the issue was the fact that the video sounded solely like they were saying, people get offended, they deconstruct their faith, they walk away from the church. And so her perspective was, I was deconstructing because I was having these moments where suddenly I was like, this doesn't seem right. These things that were taught to me all through my childhood, something's not sitting right as an adult. And so I'm going to take these things and I'm going to pick them apart with the Lord. And so she was like, the video made it sound like all people who are deconstructing are offended. Where she's like, I'm not offended. I'm just going through a time of questioning. But in her perspective, it wasn't questioning God. It was taking things as a question before God.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
That makes sense.
So
That makes sense. I do think there's a lot of offense though in people within the church. That's not anything like what you just mentioned. It's not deconstructing, it's not questioning and taking things to God. It's just you got rubbed the wrong way, or your expectations weren't met. Something happened, you got offended, and what happens is people take off and leave during that time. So I think those are different things. But
Yeah, in the video, he spoke in a very matter-of-fact way. And so I think that probably is why. And it was specifically about pastors. He said something along the lines of people deconstruction happens because there was no discipleship.
right. It was focused on the pastors.
And you fall in love with the ministry and what they give you. And then he also at the end said, woe to pastors who lead flocks that fall in love with you instead of Jesus.
yes.
But I do think a lot of what we see, at least in my experience as well, there's a lot of people who I grew up with in church who are my friends. We did ministry together. We played different places, worship. And now, one after another, they've all kind of walked away from God, from the church for various reasons. But a lot of it is, I think, because there was no discipleship. We grew up in a culture where you just had to be a yes man, and
Or the discipleship is just like sugar coated.
or it's like
I
just
want to
harsh.
challenge you, but I don't want to hurt your feelings.
It's either
It's
extreme.
either
Yeah.
it's like
or it's super harsh.
it's like, oh, they're
Yeah.
really nice, or they'll just like beat you to a pulp,
right.
like behind closed doors, and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Or there's spiritual abuse and control and
yes.
right,
like the shepherding
manipulation.
movement that was, I believe in like the early 80s where it was way far in that extreme. Like they were controlling people and calling it discipleship.
Right.
And if you
Right.
questioned anything, if you went against that, then you were not under authority. You weren't being discipled. You weren't submitting
You're
yourself.
rebellious.
You're rebellious.
Yeah.
Heard that
So
one
that's
before.
Right.
yeah.
Right.
You just have a gift. You're just talented. You don't have
Yeah.
character. Yeah, and so it's unfortunate because I think it's created such a blind spot in so many believers, especially in, at least I'm in that like generation, like what are we, millennials? In the millennial generation, there's so many people that are like, I'm 29. There's a little bit like people that are maybe like 5 to 10 years older than me, that there was like this mass exodus out of the church of young people who are in their 30s and 40s who are no longer in the church. And it's because they grew up out of that and within that culture. And it's unfortunate because the offense will create such a blind spot. And there's so many reasons. And like it leads to deconstruction, leads to like all of these other things of like social justice. I see that a lot where people will kind of grab onto social justice.
Right.
Because of offense from the church. Even
It's like they're redirecting that desire
Yeah.
for something more.
Yeah, that potentially is a easier, quicker fix to their like purpose.
Right.
Yeah.
To finding purpose.
Yeah.
Or giving themselves a voice where they felt like they
Right.
had none.
Right.
Right.
Mhm.
And it goes along to what Sarah was saying about how we find reasons to explain our pain or validate and justify our offense. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And, something, because every single one of us have been offended, at one time or another, especially within the church. It's happened to all of us. But one of the things for me, and this is one of my prayers for our kids that we talk about a lot, and I pray for a lot for them. I pray that they would encounter God at a young age, like not just learn about him, not just know the stories, not just all that, but encounter God relationally. Because many times in my offense, if I'm honest, that's been the only thing that's gotten me through to the other side, to where I wasn't one of the statistics that had left the church. It was just literally all I had was, all right, God, I remember when you met me when I was 12 years old and I was weeping and I didn't even know, I had never seen that happen. I wasn't in an ultra charismatic setting, but the Lord came on us in youth group and we were weeping and crying out in prayer and stayed up all night. that encounter, I remember it like it was yesterday, gets me through difficult situations, specifically with offense. So where I'm like, you know what? I'm going to choose to let all this stuff go and forgive and process it, but I encountered God. He's real, and I'm not running away. I'm not walking away. So encounter, that's, people talk about millennials specifically leaving the church, and my prayer is for encounter.
Yeah.
Millennials to encounter God, because I'm convinced once you encounter God, you really can't. You may be able to run and hide for a little while,
But you can't deny.
I don't know that you can ever truly turn away.
Yeah.
I mean,
It
I really
grips
don't.
you.
Yeah.
He won't let you go.
Yeah.
Like, it grieves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mine was when I was 13. I got healed in my bedroom by myself. There was no denying it was God. No, and I'm specifics. Jesus. No denying it wasn't Jesus.
Yeah.
And like that moment, I can't shake. Can't get offended past it. Like it sticks with
Yeah,
me.
exactly.
And the thing that gets me is I feel like so many people think they're having encounters in services today when we're actually just having experiences. Like an encounter is defined as something that is violent.
Yes.
It is a violent meeting.
Yes.
It's not this like feel good, la emotional thing. Like God hits your emotions. Sure, you cry. You like things happen, but like an encounter is like getting, branded. It's like a
Yes.
violent
Yeah.
experience with the Lord that you just can't
yeah.
get past. And it might be something that feels good. Like for me, like mine was healing. I was on my floor. I literally felt arms come around me and embrace me. And I was a mess. I was sobbing, but at the same time euphoric. It was like this incredible experience. And I was able to get up off my floor, which normally, like, not going to go into the whole story, but after kneeling down, I wouldn't be able to do that because of this body issue. But like it was the first time after this whole thing, I felt the arms release me. I got up with no problem and I was healed from that day on. But like it felt great, but it was violent.
Mm-hmm.
Like it wasn't this like, I'm going to forget about this in a month. No, this has stuck with me my entire life.
Yeah.
That's encounter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like it breaks my heart sometimes to see people saying like, I had such an encounter with the Lord, but you didn't feel convicted of anything. You didn't feel like you had to repent. You didn't feel like anything shifted. You didn't like change, and you forgot about it 2 months later.
Yeah.
That was a good experience in his presence.
Yeah.
Right. And I wonder.
Tell me I'm wrong.
No, I
agree.
and
I think you're
I've
right.
I think we've all probably have thought about these things before, but I wonder if a key difference between encounter and experience is that with encounter there's an exchange. Like
Mhm.
even whether you're 12 or you're 42,
Yes.
and the level of depth of understanding we have might vary depending on our age and everything.
Right.
Even at 12, there's still somewhat of an exchange. Like I'm opening up myself
Right.
to God. I'm at the altar. My heart is open. My sins, my brokenness is open to Him.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times people, especially within the Western church, we've almost deduced, or like we've almost like boiled God down to like this consumer mindset where I'm going to watch a movie. It's going to move me. It's going to give me the laugh and the thrill and the tears.
Yep.
And you come out of it like, wow, that was great. But then, and it's something to talk about in the coming weeks and days and months, but it's not transformative. And so
Wow.
I wonder, if
and it's not an exchange. Really.
it's not an exchange.
You just.
Right.
I mean, you paid a couple bucks to watch it, but
you're
it's
receiving
you're
from
just
the movie.
experiencing
Oh my
it.
goodness.
It's an experience, like a roller coaster, right? Or anything that we do that's experiential. And so I think a lot of what we don't teach is that no, it actually costs something to have an encounter.
Right.
It can happen like out of nowhere, and we didn't ask for it per se, or we weren't necessarily in a service, but more often than not, like the Lord wants to meet us where we're at. And so it requires of us to not just go somewhere and just be like, okay, here I am, but like it requires of us, like it requires faith. It requires some sort of like deliberate sacrifice, cost, like whatever it is.
And sometimes that sacrifice doesn't even come at the moment of the encounter, but it comes the next day.
Right. Obedience, like things like small things like that.
Right.
I think one of the convictions that I had recently was like had nothing to do with worship, had nothing to do with playing music. I take the train a lot. I commute a lot, and there are times where like they won't check the ticket for the train. Like the conductor won't check the ticket. And it's like, oh, cool, I can use it for the next. And I'm telling you, in my spirit, one day I woke up and I'm like, oh, okay, you know, and like I'm always like, you know, sometimes it's, I don't know if it's a sly thing or maybe, but it's a character thing. Maybe it's a poverty mindset, a spirit of poverty, thinking like, oh, I just will never have enough, and so gotta cut like costs and save money wherever I can, and being trying to be savvy. But sometimes that becomes calculative. And I'm telling you, one day he was like, I want you to buy a ticket every time you take the train, and I want you to activate it before you get on the train. Oof. And I was like, but I couldn't shake it. And I did it. And I'm telling you, I don't know necessarily how it directly connected, but I believe it really did connect to when I'm in a place of worship or leading worship. Yeah. That obedience, as small as it may seem, or like, you know, just mundane, that it did something. Yeah. When I continue to faithfully do that. Yeah. And I'm reminded of it every time I'm on the train. And I do it like consistently. Because
how you do anything is how you do everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of those little moments, they add up.
Yeah. That's very true.
Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting because I'll just put it out there, because I've been thinking a lot about, especially in the crew that we run with, we're always running after revival and talking about revival and praying for revival, and all of those types of things. But sometimes I feel like the pursuit of revival for us, if we're not careful, is not encounter, but it's experience. So it's, oh wow, that worship service blew up. That was awesome. Wow, it was so powerful. So we're and then we link that in our minds with, oh, that was a revival service because it was a good experience. But in light of this, what we're saying in the conversation, and encounter being an exchange, I think true revival, even if you look at revival history, has been an exchange. Like there has never been a revival without a massive movement of straight up repentance of sin.
Yeah.
Like
social shifts and cultural
revival has never been throughout history good worship. Right. I mean, it's always included prayer. There's always usually been prayer that's led to revival.
Yes.
But I feel like we
started worshiping.
I feel like we've almost idolized a concept of revival that's very like worship and charismatic focused, and I don't see all the time. I don't see a lot right now people running to the altar like they did in the Brownsville days. If you were familiar with that, like people would get trampled at the end of the message because they would be running down repenting of sin, like before it's too late, before anything else happens. So I think, anyway, like talk about encounter and exchange. That's the ultimate picture of it. And I believe that's what the Lord wants to do in revival. I don't know, just some thoughts, because I think it links to what we're talking about.
I mean, isn't it all idolatry? Even with the buzzword now of church hurt, like kind of going back to what we were talking about before. Everything is, it's all idolatry. It's all a pedestal. It's all an altar without God. It's all either I idolize my pastor, I idolize my experience, I idolize my feelings, I idolize my pain and my wounding, I idolize my parents, I idolize a career, I idolize worship, and this, you know, broad idea of revival. It's all acclaim and fame and riches and like social influence. It's all and I think that's the interesting part, is that maybe for a lot of people, we don't necessarily start there. There might be a genuine moment with the Lord.
Right.
But somewhere along the line, like along the path, somewhere along in that process, like whatever it is we allow in that shifts the way that we view the world and the things and what we value more and we hold like dear and we see as more precious than him, I think that's kind of where we start to like fall, like step away from the narrow path, and then it could,
Wow. For sure. There are so many. I heard someone said it. I wish I could give credit, but everyone worships something. Like people say, I don't have a God. I don't believe in God. You are going to worship something.
Mm-hmm.
And how many idols have leaked into the culture of church?
Mm.
Yeah. And then we have, unfortunately, we have leaders who fall, make a mistake and fall. And because they've been idolized, it's hard for people to bounce back from that many times, because they've almost put the leader in the place of God.
Mm.
And so, like, imagine if God falls, what are you left with? You have
Right.
you have nothing. So,
It's like the disciples in the Bible.
right.
When Jesus died, like they scattered.
Yeah.
They went back to their old way of living.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting. We just went down that road.
Yeah.
But it's so true. I love that concept of encounter being an exchange, because again, for me, there's been encounters that I've had with the Lord, like real exchanges. I remember like the really early young ones. I was like you were saying, like you don't have the same amount of understanding when you're 12 or younger, but I remember being super, super convicted in school with like little things like using bad words, and that weren't even, now that I think about it, they weren't even really bad words. But just, I remember after one of those encounters being so sensitive to the voice of the Holy Spirit, and then
Right.
deciding to continue with the exchange by submitting to that and saying, I'm going to stop using that language. This is like, I feel like this is like 4th or 5th grade for me. It was way back in the day.
Yeah.
But the exchange is what made the encounter. It's like it's what solidified it.
And it's not legalism.
No, it
It's
wasn't
not
at
a to-do
all.
list. Don't
It
do this or
wasn't
do
at all.
that, or do more of that. It's from a genuine place.
Right.
Yeah. Of the will.
Yeah. Of love.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Of love.
Right.
Yeah.
Which comes out of relationship or
Mhm.
encounter and knowing God and letting God know you.
Yeah.
I had someone talk to me about that. When it came to, I think it was drinking alcohol.
Mm.
And they were like, well, I'm not getting drunk and it's fine and all this stuff. And I'm not legally, putting any guilt on anyone. But we were just talking about like, well, why is that thing so important that you can't let it go?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not wrong. I shouldn't wear hoodies anymore. Okay. If the Holy Spirit was convicting me and saying, don't wear a hoodie, what is it in me that makes wearing a hoodie so important? Like, what is it in me that makes drinking that wine so important that I can't let it go?
Yeah.
Like, if the man that I love was to say, you do this thing and it really just hurts me. Like, sure, I could logically be like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I'm not
Mhm.
hurting anyone. I'm not sinning. This thing that I'm doing isn't
Mhm. Be
bad.
like, this is your issue.
This is your
Yeah.
issue,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. Like, I could go about that route, but I'm not going to. I'm going to be like, oh, like, it hurts the person I love. I'm not going to do it anymore because I love them.
Yeah.
And so I think like that's like when you get that thing where it doesn't actually come from this like pounded into you teaching,
Mhm.
but literally when you get to such a deep place of love relationship,
Yeah.
not religion, not love religion, but love relationship with Jesus, it's like, oh, so in your word you've said that this angers you or hurts you.
Mhm.
I love you, so I'm not going to do this. Like, that's where the conviction's coming from.
Yeah.
That like, oh, it hurts my lover. It pains my lover. And this thing is not more important than you. And so it's not even a thing to let it go.
Jesus said that. Jesus said, if you love me, obey my commandments. It's as an expression of your love.
Right.
Not as a duty to be legalistic. So that's interesting.
Yeah. And I feel like as I've grown in my relationship with the Lord, things have changed. Like, I didn't think A, B, or C was a problem when I was 18 and my relationship with the Lord was at a level. But as I've grown closer to him, that conviction has changed. And like, my mindset has changed. And it's like, okay, I do see that this bothers you. I'm going to lay it down. Like, or I knew all along that this thing bothers you, but now that we're in such a relationship as we are, that thing no longer can hold more importance in my life because our love has gotten too strong.
Yes.
That makes sense.
No, it does. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It does. I'm thinking also like the place that you're in life, the role that you're in, even if it's a leadership role, your sensitivity to those convictions has to change with the season you're in. Because if you're, as your life changes, as you have more authority, as you have more influence, as you're speaking into more people's life, you may not be able to do the stuff that you were able to do 5 years ago, 10 years ago, because of how it affects other people. Does that make sense? So it's also, that's where Paul said, anything is allowed, but not everything is beneficial.
But
and
in
then
the
it gets into that
Western
whole
world, we're taught that we're not our brother's keeper.
thing. Right. Well, that's a whole other.
We are not. We are not responsible for somebody else's heart. No way. I look out for me and me only.
That's
Sorry.
Yeah, you gotta climb the ladder of success, right?
exactly.
You gotta climb over people.
The subtle shade.
Like, Lord, help me keep my brother. Like, help me keep his heart, his spirit, her spirit.
Yeah.
Like, dear, nah.
But that
Yeah.
interesting, circling all the way back, I feel like that's way closer to the heart of discipleship. We were talking about discipleship earlier. It's not I'm over you in the Lord, so do what I say. It's a genuine love and care for someone else's spiritual well-being.
Yeah.
Like if we can disciple from that place, which is really the place I feel like the Lord disciples us from. It's from love. It's not the old man in the sky shaking his finger. How much different would discipleship be in the church if it was genuinely, I'm not going to disciple you just because you're going to stay at the ministry and serve with your talents because you're a great worship leader, but I'm going to disciple you because I care about your heart.
Yeah.
And we're in a place right now where I can speak to you. I'm there for you. I can help you. So I'm going to pour into you because I care about you and no other reason.
Right, and I'm also going to tell you the truth.
Yes,
In
and not
love.
watered
Yeah.
down.
In love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think also to touch upon, as we're talking about this, I'm hoping that like no one takes it as it's such a like we just have to blindly do all of these things. I think a lot of this also goes into like inner healing.
Oh, for
And
sure.
Oh yeah.
It has nothing to do
For
with the fact that like
sure.
therapy is a bad thing, mental health is not real.
No.
You know, a lot of what
Talk about
happens
Yeah.
within these encounters is that it just can't be done, I believe, apart from the Lord.
Yeah.
If we just do
Right.
mental health and therapy by its within itself, it just becomes like, look at myself in the mirror and that's it. And it's just introspection. It's just, you need to heal. You need to find your best self. You need to become whole.
Right.
And it's really just all the fabrication of of our own doing. We just make ourselves a better person. We just make ourselves a happier person. We learn actually not to heal and find freedom in these things. We just find ways to cope.
Right.
Yeah.
And to
behavior
coping
modification.
to dull it.
Yeah.
To dull the anxiety, to
Yes.
dull the fear, to dull the panic attacks and the depression. And we just keep it at bay,
Yeah.
but never necessarily actually are freed from it. And so I think when it comes to the Lord, one of the things that he will do in these encounters is he will actually open up the parts of ourselves that we have put caution tape on. We've not allowed anybody to touch. Even we won't go there. We won't talk about it with anybody. we won't share it with anybody. And I think we all carry stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I think that I wanted to share that part because I think it would help like paint a more holistic picture of what we're talking about.
It's true.
In the sense of like that stuff matters, like what your experience matters, like what you've gone through.
Absolutely.
You know, what we've gone through, how we've been hurt, and I've also failed and hurt other people matters.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's so opposite of what we see in the culture. It's a manhunt.
Right.
It's a witch hunt, literally. Either it's on gender, it's on, you know, politics, it's on your body image, it's on fashion, it's on money and the rich and the poor. There's such like a distinction of like an attack on specific types of people, and obviously like we see that with Christians. And man, like I think a lot of, and I guess it's a way to like feel justified in our offense again, like we were talking about, but yeah.